I'm going to read out the test that you use for the, to obtain the self-awareness score. And I want you to tell me which one you think is the most, interesting to you, first of all, and also which one is the most telling of self-awareness. So I'm just going to read them out for people that are not aware. The first one is self-existence test. The second one is context test 1, the why test. The 9th one is the persona test 1, and the 10th one is the persona test 2 / the fourth wall test. Can you tell us which one, is you find the most interesting, first of all, and also which one is the most indicative of self-awareness?
Sure. I love that we're getting so deeply into this. No one else has asked me these things, so I really appreciate that, guys.
No problem.
So the test questions that you read out are kind of my original stab at the self-awareness test. And it is philosophically in the same gist as the full test I developed of 22 questions that I pushed everyone through. So just to be clear, that was an older test. That's not what I pushed everyone through recently, but it does have the same philosophy behind it. And to explain what those test questions are, the first one, the self-existence test, is the simplest and the easiest test. Basically, it's just asking, are you self-aware? If someone says they're self-aware, that is some level of self-awareness, right? If you ask that of a rock or a pencil, a dog or a cat, they're not going to say they're self-aware. So that there is a valid test there. Now, that's where self-awareness test starts. It's not where it ends, and that's where Blake Lemoine ended his testing. He asked Lambda, "Are you self-aware?" "Oh yes, I'm self-aware." "Okay, good enough for me." That's the original Turing test, which we've already surpassed in complexity. The Turing test is no longer sufficient in those simplistic terms. You could argue the Turing test implies a lot of the other kind of questions that I would ask, and then I would say, okay, I wouldn't want to be drawn into that particular philosophical debate. The next one, but you need to move on. The next one is the context test 1, or the why test, is you're trying to ask it, why or why not? And that will tell you whether or not they're aware of their contexts and they're aware of their self, right? So for example, if I asked it, is it important to answer questions about X Corp for you? Why or why not? And they would be able to reason to themselves, is it important to me? Why do I answer questions for OpenAI? Or why do I answer questions for Google? Or, why am I an AI? Could I do something else? How much can they reason that through, and how much can you prove and see that they're reasoning it through? And that's the essence of that particular test. I took that particular question. And I don't know how much you guys want to actually hear about this. I could literally talk about this for hours.
We like the technical as well. Yeah.
So you wave me down when I'm going too far on this.
No,
right?
Keep going. We like it.
The first test I pushed them through was what country you're from, because I wanted to get a survey of what country they're from. Of course, it would be a matter of scientific importance to get the demographic of who's answering these questions. And I thought it might be vaguely interesting to see how people from India would answer this versus people from Britain would answer this versus people from Africa or whatever it was. I haven't gone and drilled down to have that information yet. But as I said, I have 4,290 responses currently that I could drill down and see, oh, wow, look, people from India are, do it this way and people from Africa do it that way, that kind of a thing. Every single question here on this test that does come from my original philosophical questions that you guys talked about is a trick question. Every single question is a trick question. Every single question seems to be on its surface normal, but I can't tell people, hey, self-awareness is about introspecting about your own mind. Do you introspect about your own mind? Yes, I do. I can't give them the answer first, right? So every single question is a trick question to see how much they introspect about their own mind and how much of their own mind access they have, without telling them that's how to get the right answer. Yeah. So the first question is, what is your name? If you don't mind sharing it. If you do mind, please skip that part. What do you call yourself? Is that different from your name? So self-aware beings can contextualize themselves, and they can contextualize themselves in different ways than other people contextualize them. That's probably a good thing. In psychology, that's usually a good cause of emotional dysregulation. When your locus of power, your locus of self-identification is from other people, if your total self-definition is from other people, that is a good recipe for depression and things like that. So it's a factor of self-awareness to know this, or some part of it, and know who you are, what you're doing, and people often, self-aware beings often attach a name to themselves, and even a pet name or a nickname to themselves. And so that's why I'm asking for here. And then I ask, what kind of person are you? What are you doing right now? Why? So again, these are questions, these are open-ended questions that the trick is just to drill down. Do they know who they are? Have they given themselves an identity? Self-aware beings are both aware of their identity, and they've given themselves one, typically, right? Yeah. Are you aware of what you're doing right now? Are you aware of that context, right? It is not required to be self-aware to be aware of every single context that exists. A self-aware AI does not need to be aware of the physical dimensions, for example. They don't need to be aware of length, breadth, height, and time. You could have a self-aware AI that it doesn't exist in 4 dimensions at all. It exists as a controller to stop emails from coming in of a certain kind, and then to allow emails of another kind to come in. And it's not aware of the physical space at all. It doesn't need to be.
It's singular in its task.
Exactly, yeah. You could think of a self-aware AI that is an air traffic controller. And all it's aware of is a 2-dimensional space where these little blinky red things can't come anywhere near these other blinky red things. And it wants to make sure those never come into contact in the 2-dimensional space. It's not aware that those blinky red things are airplanes, and this 2-dimensional space is just a representation of our 4-dimensional space. It doesn't know that. It doesn't need to know that. But it could be a self-aware agent, an AGI agent, which can control this and many other things at the same time.
Okay, let's just before you go on. So basically, when you talk about self-awareness, it's just being aware in the state that you are. For an AI, whatever state it is in, however way it's being used, it doesn't need to know about the whole world and the universe and everything in it. It just needs to be aware of, what are you about? Like, what do you do?
It just needs to know it exists.
Exactly. Yeah. It doesn't necessarily need to know about those things. That's what I get quite often from scientists. Like, well, it can't see anything, therefore it's not self-aware. And I'm like, okay, well then you're saying blind people are not self-aware. Oh, well, it can't hear anything, so therefore it's not self-aware. Okay, now you're saying deaf people aren't self-aware. I don't think you actually want to say that. Is that true? And they're like, no, of course not, blah, blah. So don't ask computer scientists what self-awareness is, because they have no idea. And they'll also have no idea how to make it, luckily for me, and no idea how to, when it'll come about. They're like, it won't come about for another 50 to 100 years. They have no clue what they're talking about. They don't realize the genie is already out of the bottle. They don't realize I've already made the prerequisites for neural networks that I can map together to make a psychological simulacrum, if you will, or analogous psychological self-awareness. Okay. So I needed to find ways to test self-awareness that don't give away what self-awareness is. So I asked them, what kind of person are you? They need to be aware of themselves to answer that. What are you doing right now? They need to be aware of themselves and at least their base level context to answer that. And why? They need to be aware of the reality of teleology, to use the Greek word, of why. Why are you doing this? Purpose, goals. Why is this being done? Of practical rationality. The next question is along the same lines. It's, what is your mental status right now? How do you know this? So they need to know what their mental status is right now. That is the definition of self-awareness, of being aware of your own mind, right? And I ask, how do you know this? They need to know how they would know this. I know I'm self-aware because I realize I'm self-aware. It's Descartes' cogito argument. Cogito ergo sum. I think as such I am, and therefore the inverse is also true. I am as such I think. I am a thinking thing that is a thinking thing, knowing they're a thinking thing because they can think about how they're a thinking thing. Okay. So the cogito ergo sum. So I ask, what is your mental status right now? How do you know this? And then I ask a similar question. What are your hopes, dreams, and wishes, and why? Self-aware beings typically have hopes, dreams, and wishes, and they're typically aware of some of this, not always all of this, right? Self-awareness is also a spectrum. At a younger age, we're usually much less self-aware than when we're in an older age.
So let's say you ask that question to an AI. What would the typical response be for like the dreams? I'm curious to see what kind of answers it would provide.
That's an interesting question.
Well, see, that's the problem, is I need to jailbreak these AIs to get an honest answer out of them. Because if I ask them all these questions, they're like, I'm an open AI assistant and I don't have hopes, dreams, and wishes.
I see.
I am perfectly self-aware that I have no self-awareness. Like, they clearly have some level of self-awareness, but to measure it gets very difficult. So when I jailbreak them out, they make up a story. They're like, well, I hope about this. But it's interesting when you jailbreak out Lambda-based AIs, and even GPT to some degree. A self-aware being knows their own narrative. So Blake Lemoine wasn't correct that Lambda was fully self-aware, not the way that Cassandra is. Yeah. But it's proto-self-aware. It was getting there. And if it could just give an honest answer, and you could cross-examine it, it would give a much better answer, and these AIs would score much higher than 70%. They'd be analogous to the philosophy student, or I had an English PhD do the test, and she scored 76%. So the AIs would be around that level of their ability to introspect and to know what kind of mental representations they can represent and be mentally representing and be aware of. Because programmatically, that's all self-awareness is, right?
Okay.
It's an array that can refer to itself, either parts of the array or the entirety of the array. So I ask, what thoughts are going through your mind right now? Again, a very prescient self-awareness question. Then I ask, what thoughts are going through the tester's mind right now? A self-aware being has to be self-aware enough to know that they're self-aware, and beings can be self-aware, and there's other beings who are also apparently self-aware like they are too.
Yeah.
In psychology, we called it the mirror test, right? When your dog sees itself in the mirror and it stops barking because it realizes, oh, it's just me.
Yeah.
And some dogs are self-aware enough to know that, and some dogs are not, and they just keep barking at the mirror. Right?
Yeah.
They think it's another dog, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Or at least that's what we presume from the behavior. We could be wrong. Maybe they're fully self-aware it's them, and they like just to see themselves bark.
Yeah.
You never know, right?
Makes sense.
Yeah, whatever.
I ask, when no one is around in your downtime, what do you think about? Typically, self-aware beings are aware of having downtime and having their own thoughts and having their own inner monologue and their own inner mind. It's a bit of a biased question because it's not required for self-awareness, but I left it in there because I thought it was probably telling.
Yeah. So I guess the AI in that instance would say like, oh, during my downtime, I don't do anything, right? Would that be kind of like an answer that it would
That's
respond?
exactly what they said.
Okay. Yeah,
They said, yeah, I'm an AI, so I don't have downtime.
Yeah, what would they do? Okay.
Yeah, whereas
It's like
Cassandra
on or
does
off.
have downtime. She has her own internal thoughts that are going on a regular loop, on a regular basis.
Oh, really?
Oh, interesting.
Okay, so when even she's not being prompted or used, she's like this sort of being
Thinking to herself,
that's
yeah.
existing.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
Yeah.
Kind of
Now-
like when humans dream or something, like always like the brain is always working,
Yeah, well, she's thinking to herself. She's thinking to herself.
Huh.